Not much had happened in the way of equal rights and fair housing in the U.S. by the turn of the 20th century. The 15th Amendment, passed in 1869 and ratified in 1870, gave all male citizens, regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, the right to vote. The problem was that it took over 90 years for that amendment to reach its full potential. Even with the protection of the U.S. Constitution, many southern states and local jurisdictions imposed such challenges as poll taxes and literacy tests, thereby disenfranchising most blacks at the time from voting. This continued well into the 20th century, and poll taxes were addressed in the 24th Amendment to the Constitution. That amendment prohibited the polling places from imposing a poll tax, or from refusing to allow someone to vote for failure to pay a poll tax. The 24th Amendment, 1964, to the Constitution of the United States prohibited the federal and state governments from imposing poll taxes before a citizen right to participate in a federal election. It was proposed by the U.S. Congress on August 27, 1962, and was ratified by the states on January 23, 1964. With the onset of the American Civil War, 1861-65, the suffrage movement lost some momentum, as many women turned their attention to assisting in efforts related to the conflict between the states. After the war, women's suffrage endured another setback, when the women's rights movement found itself divided over the issue of voting rights for black men. Stanton and some other suffrage leaders objected to the proposed 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which would give black men the right to vote, but failed to extend the same privilege to American women of any skin color. In 1870, following the American Civil War, the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing the right to vote to former slaves, was adopted. The 24th Amendment was adopted as a response to policies adopted in various southern states after the ending of post-Civil War Reconstruction, 1865-77, to limit the political participation of African Americans. Such policies were bolstered by the 1937 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Breedlove v. Suttles, which upheld a Georgia poll tax. The Supreme Court reasoned that voting rights are conferred by the states, and that the states may determine voter eligibility as they see fit, save for conflicts with the 15th Amendment, respecting race, and the 19th Amendment, respecting sex. It further ruled that a tax on voting did not amount to a violation of privileges or immunities protected by the 14th Amendment. In short, because the tax applied to all voters, rather than just certain classes of voters, it did not violate the 14th or 15th Amendment. During the civil rights era of the 1950s, particularly following the Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954, such policies increasingly were seen as barriers to voting rights, particularly for African Americans and the poor. Thus, the 24th Amendment was proposed by Senator Spessard Lindsey Holland of Florida and ratified to eliminate an economic instrument that was used to limit voter participation. 2 years after its ratification in 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court, invoking the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause in Harper v. Virginia Board of Electors, extended the prohibition of poll taxes to state elections. Another group of people that were disenfranchised from voting in any election in the U.S. were women. From the founding of the country in 1789, women did not have the right to vote until the 19th Amendment. Ratified on August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution granted American women the right to vote, a right known as woman suffrage. At the time the U.S. was founded, its female citizens did not share all of the same rights as men, including the right to vote. It was not until 1848 that the movement for women's rights launched on a national level with a convention in Seneca Falls, New York, organized by abolitionists Elizabeth Cady Stanton, 1815-1902, and Lucretia Mott, 1793-1880. Following the convention, the demand for the vote became a centerpiece of the women's rights movement. Stanton and Mott, along with Susan B. Anthony, 1820-1906, and other activists, formed organizations that raised public awareness and lobbied the government to grant voting rights to women. After a 70-year battle, these groups finally emerged victorious with the passage of the 19th Amendment. In 1918, President Wilson switched his stand on women's voting rights from objection to support through the influence of Kat, who had a less combative style than Paul. Wilson also tied the proposed suffrage amendment to America's involvement in World War I, 1914-18, and the increased role women had played in the war efforts. When the amendment came up for a vote, Wilson addressed the Senate in favor of suffrage. As reported in the New York Times on October 1, 1918, Wilson said, "I regard the extension of suffrage to women as vitally essential to the successful prosecution of the great war of humanity in which we are engaged." However, despite Wilson's newfound support, the amendment proposal failed in the Senate by 2 votes. Another year passed before Congress took up the measure again. On May 21, 1919, U.S. Representative James R. Mann, 1856-1922, a Republican from Illinois and chairman of the Suffrage Committee, proposed the House resolution to approve the Susan Anthony Amendment granting women the right to vote. The measure passed the House 304-89, a full 42 votes above the required 2/3 majority. 2 weeks later, on June 4, 1919, the Senate passed the 19th Amendment by 2 votes over its 2/3 required the majority, 56-25. The amendment was then sent to the states for ratification. Within 6 days of the ratification cycle, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin each ratified the amendment. Kansas, New York, and Ohio followed on June 16, 1919. By March of the following year, a total of 35 states had approved the amendment, 1 state shy of the 2/3 required for ratification. Southern states were adamantly opposed to the amendment, however, and 7 of them, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Virginia, had already rejected it before Tennessee's vote on August 18, 1920. It was up to Tennessee to tip the scale for woman suffrage. The outlook appeared bleak, given the outcomes in other southern states and given the position of Tennessee's state legislators in their 48-48 tie. The state's decision came down to 23-year-old Representative Harry T. Byrne, 1895-1977, a Republican from McMinn County, to cast the deciding vote. Although Byrne opposed the amendment, his mother convinced him to approve it. Mrs. Byrne reportedly wrote to her son, "Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat put the rat in ratification." With Byrne's vote, the 19th Amendment was ratified. Certification by U.S. Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby, 1869-1950, followed on August 26, 1920. On November 2nd of that same year, more than 8 million women across the U.S. voted in elections for the first time. It took over 60 years for the remaining 12 states to ratify the 19th Amendment. Mississippi was the last to do so on March 22, 1984. By the late 1880s, many of the slaves that had been freed 20 years earlier had migrated from the South to northern and Midwestern states. America was experiencing the Industrial Revolution as the railroads connected the 2 coasts and crisscrossed the entire country. With the discovery of electricity and the inventions of so many products we use today, population soared in the major cities. Housing was built to provide living quarters for the lower-class workers, yet most buildings at the time had no elevators, limited running water, and minimal electricity. Over the next 20 years, many apartment buildings in cities like Chicago, Boston, New York, Cleveland, and Philadelphia were built to house all the workers in the factories and office buildings that sprung up over a 30-year period. By the late 1920s, housing conditions worsened as overcrowding and disrepair became the norm. Through all this, blacks, women, and other minorities had no rights when it came to housing, employment, financing, and in many cases, voting. As America was enduring the Great Depression, we were still more than 30 years away from laws that protected minorities.